Like the content you see? Support this channel on Patreon. Link in the description. During a time of honor in Bushido, there were those who cared nothing for it, only glory, recognition, or a respectable challenger. Some would call them self-serving and without integrity. Others might say they were true warriors with a singular goal, honing their craft as human killing machines.
And did they buy you off?
Screw that noise. See, all I'm looking for is a worthy opponent.
Helming from the Ryukyu Islands, Mugen was less warrior and more pirate, surviving through larceny. His crimes eventually caught up with him, imprisoned and nearly executed before he escaped. Mugen became a vagrant, traveling Japan alone until he met Fu and Jing. Together, the group searched for the samurai that smelled of sunflowers, all the way from the capital of Edo to the port city of Nagasaki. During their journey, they met other samurai, assassins, ninja, and the Yakuza. And throughout their travels, Mugen's skills developed as he challenged those who would give him a good fight.
気でも狂ったか!
正気です。今はこの国に来てよかったと思っております。初めて手応えのある相手に出会えた気がします。連れてきていただいて感謝しております。
Luo-Lang, also known as Rarou. Actually, I'm really not sure what his official name is. The copy of Sword of the Stranger that I have refers to him as Rarou in the subtitles. But his character name outside the movie seems to be Luo-Lang, so I'm a bit confused. In any case, the character's a bit of a Champloo himself, an odd mixture. He represents the Ming, the middle-aged Chinese, yet he is undeniably European, probably Anglo-Saxon with his blonde hair and blue eyes. Whatever his mysterious background may be, what we do know is that he was a formidable warrior, a natural fighter through and through. And he too only had one goal in life, one single objective: a suitable opponent. For this video, I will be examining these characters as they appear in their respective anime series and movie. For Mugen, I will be examining him throughout the Samurai Champloo series. For Luo-Lang, I will be examining him during the events of the Sword of the Stranger movie. Both Mugen and Luo-Lang have comparable speed and dexterity. Both play by typical anime rules, which means they have superhuman achievements, engaging in fights that would realistically last seconds rather than minutes. Though sometimes they do last seconds, it's rather inconsistent. The two of them were very acrobatic fighters, whether it was Mugen's somersaults or Lu's leaps and bounds. They could evade arrows casted from bows and crossbows alike, and the reaction time in combat was remarkable. Their differences arise in their strength and resilience. While one could say Luo-Lang has a strength advantage with a more imposing figure than the scrawny, malnourished Mugen, the vagrant has far more durability. Mugen has survived a bullet to the gut, 2 explosions, stab wounds, slashing lacerations, and blunt force trauma, and yet he always got up and kept fighting. For Mugen, it was decapitation or a stab through the heart that would end him, nothing less. That's not to say that Luo-Lang was without his own achievements with constitution. The Ming warriors that he traveled with were noted for medicine that nullified all pain and feeling, making them more tenacious fighters. When one of Lu's companions asked why he did not use the medicine, Luo-Lang simply replied, This could indicate that he has yet to meet a challenge that would make something like a painkiller necessary, or rather, his natural pain tolerance was inherently too great. Whichever the case, on a pure physical level, we simply have more examples of Mugen's immense levels of constitution versus what can only be speculated with regards to Luo-Lang. Luo-Lang is extremely skilled and can match his opponent's dexterity, but Mugen was an armored truck. Mugen is the edge for his physical abilities. For much of the Samurai Champloo series, Mugen carried his signature Typhoon Swell Sword with his hidden dagger. While it is true that he broke the blade at the end of the series, swapping it out for a European broadsword, this analysis will stem around his original weapon. From what I can tell from the weapon, and Mugen's own fighting style, it seems to be a double-edged weapon with a moderate, continuous curve that favors the true edge. The origins of the weapon is unknown, though its style is very Japanese, with the look of an extended side dagger, including the signature Yoku guard. It's likely Mugen simply picked up the weapon on one of his raids, rather than it being his own forging, or the forging of a personal craftsman. The tips of the Yoku guard, known as sume, can be used as secondary weapons, but it's more likely used for blade catching, though Mugen hardly made use of either method. However, he did make use of his hidden blade, and quite often, calling it his, quote, ace in the hole. In terms of armor, Mugen wore, well, none. I'm sure if someone asked him why he did not, he'd probably say something like,
Shut up, you little bitch!
or in other words, Mugen is the type of person who would look down on armor in general. Plus, it would hinder his unorthodox and acrobatic style. Luo-Lang uses a relatively standard Chinese Dao from the Ming period. The weapon is classified as a single-edge weapon, typically with a short edge on the tip of the back end. The blade was slightly curved, primarily used for slashing and chopping, though it was still capable of stabbing as well. According to Dr. Peter Kindfield, the Chinese Dao was classified as the warrior sword, its personality that of a tiger, brave, hard, quick, and powerful. Its single edge lends itself more to aggressive strikes and defenses, which align with Luo-Lang's own fighting style. Lu's Dao was a bit more subtle than some of the others. His personal weapon was more reminiscent of the katana than the more pronounced Chinese broadswords. The hilt of his weapon also had a more subtle guard, meant less for blade catching and more for cupping blood so that the warrior's grip was not compromised. To top it off, the end of his handle was sewn with a tassel, not for pretty decoration, but for distraction and counterweight. And though not confirmed in the film, he did seem to carry several kunai daggers on his person. In terms of armor, he was a minimalist, keeping himself free to outmaneuver his opponents. His only noteworthy pieces of armor were his gauntlets, which would help prevent any potential dehandings. Mugen and Luo-Lang's weapons and armor are extensions of their personal styles. Mugen's sword was as unique as his breakdancing technique. Luo-Lang's Chinese Dao was powerful, direct, and imposing as he was. In terms of which weapon I favor head-to-head, purely on the merits of its build and functionality, I'd side with the Typhoon Swell Sword. Its Yoku guard, coupled with his double-edged blade, give it more options in combat. And though Luo-Lang does have a slight advantage in his armor, his straightforward yet deadly Dao simply did not have as many uses, like more cutting angles and blade catching. Not to mention, Mugen also has his hidden blade as a fallback, though this could be answered or matched by Luo-Lang's kunai daggers. That said, Mugen does get the slight edge for his weaponry, if not for his armor. Within Japan, both Mugen and Luo-Lang were regarded as ferocious warriors. Mugen constantly impressed swordsmen far more skilled than himself. When he first met Jin, the young Ronin criticized his fighting style, but still admitted that Mugen's talent was extraordinary. Likewise, Luo-Lang was regarded as the very best of the Ming warriors, earning high compliments from the shogunate, Itadori, and his Ming cohorts. Based on Luo-Lang's commentary, no one in the Ming Empire challenged him, and he traveled to Japan solely to find a fighter on his level. One can even infer, based on his racial makeup, that he has been looking for quite some time, traveling across the known world to find his equal. These accolades were backed up by their individual achievements. Mugen's most noteworthy feats were against the Hake Master, Shoriru, the assassin Sera, and the vengeful Mandusuki. In each fight, Mugen showcased how effective his Samurai Champloo style was, keeping up with them all. But that same style that kept him competing in each fight was also reckless, and he was prone to getting nicked and stabbed. Lucky for Mugen, he had thick skin and a tenacious spirit, but it does not bode well for his swordsmanship. Kariya Kagatoki, nicknamed the Hand of God, says it best.
You utilize erratic movements that prevent anyone from predicting them.
Huh?
But you must learn to make use of your intellect in the martial arts. By relying solely upon instinct and reflex, you involuntarily reveal your limitations to your enemy.
Quit talking to me like you're all hot
And the issue of Mugen solely using his talent, solely using instinct and reflex, always comes up as an issue when he is met with skilled swordsmen. Mugen was self-trained in the Ryukyu martial arts, adapting several kinds of techniques into a mixture of sporadic swordplay. He integrated elements of breakdancing, something akin to capoeira, with undisciplined swordplay more akin to a drunken pirate. It was his pure physicality that pushed him through, overwhelming his foes, and if he could not, he usually tanked their counters to stay in the fight longer than most would. When fighting foes like Kagetoki or Sarah, they easily pinpointed his haphazard style, Kagetoki through his experience, and Sarah through Mugen's aura. Once they did this, they put Mugen on his back foot, and eventually had him beat. But it's worth mentioning that Mugen trained himself in the Hake technique, which involved using one's inner chi, cutting your opponent without making contact with your blade. This only comes up once in the middle of the series, yet Mugen never applies the skill again, which one would think he should against the enemies he would end up facing. Luo-Lang also has achievements of his own, though his stem more from accolades and reputation than anything else. Perhaps the most significant insight we have from him, believe it or not, is from his death scene, where he confesses that this has been the first time he had ever been wounded. Within the narrative of the film, it's rather obvious that Luo-Lang was the best swordsman of the time. Shogunate Itadori could not defeat him, even with superior armor and a superior weapon in open battle. Luo-Lang found no challenge in any of the Japanese soldiers they fought, or any of the Ming warriors he traveled with, even though they themselves were extremely lethal. His only true challenger was the film's protagonist, Nanashi, who eventually defeated him. But it should be noted that Luo-Lang's defeat came less from being less skilled or outfought, but more as in any given Sunday victory, to use a term from American football. With regards to style, Luo-Lang was very similar to Mugen, very acrobatic, integrating hand-to-hand martial arts with his swordplay. But where Mugen was erratic, Lu was more polished and subtle. Considering his weapon type and the country he hailed from, it's likely Luo-Lang studied wushu. As stated before, Lu's wushu broadsword was regarded as the way of the tiger, using ferocious cleaves and coiling attacks. But what is most interesting about the Ming warrior style is that he sometimes tapered this with a fencer's mentality, controlling the center line of combat. Again, while this is mere speculation on my part, this may derive from a European background. All of this skill culminates in Luo-Lang's combative showings, such as his ability to catch swords between his hands, or throw swords against his enemies with precision. He truly was a master swordsman, not only because of his technique, but because of his applied and experienced talent. There is the subject of anime fights as they apply to reaction time and physical ability. In real-life fighting, it may take several minutes for a duel to end, not because of some unexplained precognition or reaction time, but because each duelist would fight to both preserve their own life and end their foes. Some would turn to Olympic fencing as a reference for a realistic fight, when this is not entirely true. The goal of the sport is simply to hit your opponent first, disregarding if they hit you back, even a millisecond later. In a real fight, both duelists will be mortally wounded. Swordplay was more conservative, as each fighter looked for ways to win their opponent while guarding themselves. With regards to movie and anime fights, especially with regards to semi-historical stories, such as feudal Japan, I try to resolve both realistic fighting with cartoon logic. Crap, I just realized I went on a bit of a rant. Though at a glance, Mugen and Luo-Lang's fighting styles and skills may look similar, it's their training that sets them apart. They both were rather acrobatic, Mugen with his capoeira swordplay, and Luo-Lang with his wushu blade work. But Mugen was a freestyle fighter, undisciplined, and his weaknesses showed themselves when fighting competent opponents. Lu was more traditionally trained, and though his style was energetic, he was more refined and calculating, knowing when to turn on the jets and when to hold the line. It would be a difficult task to wear Mugen down to defeat, but the Vagrant would leave himself open far too often to the Ming warrior's skill. Luo-Lang gets the edge for his martial skill and tactical abilities. A fight between Mugen and Luo-Lang is a very probable affair for two reasons. One, they both lived in the same time period, during a time where firearms and foreigners were becoming more commonplace in Japan.
The Europeans are everywhere!
2. They were both in search for one another, in the sense that they both wanted to face a challenger worthy of their skill. So if they ever met on the roads of Japan, who would come out on top? Let's set up this fight. Let's say it takes place at the location of the very first scene of Afro Samurai. The following is a hypothetical explanation of these outcomes. First, let's look at the early fight. I'm fairly certain it will be Mugen who would attack first, though there is an argument for Luo-Lang doing the same. I favor Mugen opening the attack, but they could certainly meet each other head up, as Luo-Lang and Nanashi did. Whatever the case, Mugen would be the one who would set the early tempo, using his typical erratic movements to overwhelm Luo-Lang. Luo-Lang would likely take the time to measure Mugen and his rhythm, much like Kagatoki. Because of this, the fight would look a lot like an advantage to Mugen, as he would be pressing more of an offensive. In the early fight, I see Mugen taking a 2-to-1 advantage. It's possible for Luo-Lang to find a tiny gap in Mugen's defenses, or waiting for the Vagrant to overextend himself. But I find it more likely for Mugen to press his physical advantage in a speed assault, before the Ming warrior could gather his balance. But if Mugen cannot manage this, Luo-Lang would figure out his rhythm, changing his tactics from conservative swordplay to an aggressive assault. Through savage cleaves, crosscuts, and slashes, Luo-Lang would drive Mugen on his back foot. But unlike Mugen, Luo-Lang's strikes would be far more studied and deliberate. In a way, it would even look like he was adopting Mugen's own style, leaping overhead to compromise Mugen's flank, or sweeping at Mugen's feet to undermine his balance. As erratic and seemingly unpredictable as Mugen's style was, it was limited to his reflex. As long as Luo-Lang could subvert that reflex, he would be able to pick Mugen apart. In the mid-fight, I see Luo-Lang taking a 3-to-1 advantage. There is an off chance that Mugen can find a counter within Luo-Lang's foolhardy offensive. But considering how tight and efficient Luo-Lang kept his martial form, I find this unlikely. More often than not, I think this is the point where Luo-Lang would take a sudden and dominating advantage by way of his more intentional martial skill. But Luo-Lang's blade would have to be true in order to end Mugen indefinitely. Mugen's superior durability could extend this battle into a long-form fight. It would look much the same as the mid-fight, with Mugen on his back foot, very much akin to his fight with the assassin Sarah, bloodied, cut, and bruised, but still raging on like a bull. But he would know that a straight-up fight would be futile. At this point, I think he would use his ace in the hole, drawing his hidden dagger at the most opportune moment. In the late fight, Mugen's best chance would be his hidden dagger, but I find it doubtful for Luo-Lang to fall into this trap. Considering his measured swordplay, I do not think he would overextend his offensive efforts so much that he would not look for any kind of counter, hidden or otherwise. There is of course the chance that Mugen's hidden blade would give him a definitive edge, but ultimately, I favor Luo-Lang for a 2-to-1 advantage in the late fight. Mugen's best chances are in the early and late fight because of his physicality, in one way due to his sheer speed and tenacious assaults, and on the other end, due to his superior durability. But of all the scenarios, I see this ending in the mid to late fight. Now I know what some of you are wondering, and it's something that has come up on this channel a few times. But wait, Mugen got more advantages throughout the video by way of his physicality and weaponry, and this is true. But what also must be noted is the sum of all parts. His durability advantage is present, but that only allows him to sustain a lot of injury, not win him a sword fight. It's one of the main differences between him and Jin. Mugen often found himself bloodied and bruised at the end of his fights, while Jin usually found himself unscathed. Like Jin, Luo-Lang was very guarded, which allowed him to remain unharmed for the majority of his fights, even when the odds were stacked against him, showcasing more skill. Also, Mugen received an advantage for his weaponry, but most of those advantages, like his Yokugar's blade-catching abilities, were never utilized, and his hidden dagger was a bit of a wild card, which did not always have a successful outcome. And then there's the case of Mugen's inner chi technique, but his showings with the ability aren't consistent enough to factor into an analysis that is all about consistencies and probabilities. In the grand scheme of likelihoods, my money will be on Luo-Lang, who I identify as a more masterful version of Mugen, style and all. His martial skill edge overshadows that of Mugen's other advantages. In a mid or late fight, I see Luo-Lang pegging down Mugen and his more unsophisticated blade work, just like the masters Mugen fought. Eventually, Luo-Lang would find the misstep, and though it may take some time, his blade would eventually find Mugen's heart or some other vital organ, ending the contest for good. And thus, If I were a betting man, my wager will be on Luo-Lang, the Ming warrior, as the victor. Of course, this is all my opinion, based on my interpretation of the Samurai Champloo and Sword of the Stranger lore. Do you agree that Luo-Lang would take a majority victory against Mugen, or do you believe the Vagrant is more likely the victor? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, peace, love, and may your sword always strike true. Aang was noted for his mastery of the elements, while Sora was esteemed for his melee combat. But if they met and knew they had to end the other, which team would come out on top? Which pair would be the ultimate survivor? Coming from the Ryukyu Islands, it's likely Mugen. The young Ronin criticizes